So I have this friend, and she's really good at cooking when she follows the recipe. She makes a whole bunch of stuff, and you know it's gonna be good when she makes it the first time because she's following the recipe. Even when she tells you that it's some sort of vegan dessert that you think is gonna taste like dirt, it ends up being actually pretty good when she follows the recipe. The thing is, though, that at some point, because we tell her, like, oh, yeah, it came out really good and you've done a really good job, blah, 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 blah. After she makes it a couple times, then she gets all confident and whatnot. And then she starts adding things and taking away things. And what used to taste really good doesn't taste that good anymore. And then she's like, oh, how does it taste? And because you've told her 3 times before that it was great, then you feel compromised to be like, oh, yeah, it tastes really nice when you know that it's nah. So the thing is that when you look at your own life and when I look at my life, it is very much like cooking. We decide how we want to live our lives, and then every day we make decisions, and those decisions, you can call them ingredients. We add them to our lives, and then over time, whatever it is that we are cooking begins to take shape. And very much like good food, you know that there are some types of food that you just have to smell them and your mouth it just goes like water and you're like, oh my gosh. But then there's this other type of food, and yeah, I don't want to name any names, but there's some kind of food that you just smell them and it doesn't smell that good. And if you haven't smelled durian, some Asian thing called durian, that stuff smells bad. Like you smell it and you want to go on a diet right away. So the thing is, as soon as we decide how we're going to live our lives, we start adding ingredients every day because we make decisions based on whatever principles and values we have decided that are going to be our recipe book. The main question then is, who wrote our recipe book? If you believe in the Bible and you believe in God and you follow God, then your recipe book is the Bible because God wrote his recipe book. And if you read the book of Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17, in that book, God basically gives you the 10 steps to developing a good dish that is going to be your life. We call them the 10 Commandments. And then also later on in the Bible, God says that he can see what's going to happen in the future and he can tell people what's going to happen before it even happens. And because of that, basically, he knows every recipe that can possibly exist, and he is only going to give you the recipes that are going to make dishes that are actually good for you. However, we are free to choose, and you can choose whatever recipe book you want. The question is then, over time, what's your food smelling like? You can tell when something smells really good that you get hungry, but sometimes you can cook something and if it doesn't smell that good, then you just don't want to eat it anymore. And what happens is that people that decide one way or the other, they can either become a source of happiness and well-being and joy to those around them and to themselves because they're cooking great food, or they can become a source of bitterness and basically poison themselves and everyone around them. The question is, what recipe are they following and where did they get that recipe from? We have to do some sort of introspection and realize that our very lives are the result of what we have decided to do, regardless of your environment, your genetics, or your nurturing, or your nature, whatever you want to call it. We decide every day what we add or subtract from our lives. And over time, we have to be sensible and honest enough with ourselves to realize whether or not we are cooking something delicious or something malicious. The thing is that people that decide to cook for evil, their lives are not that great. They may look on the surface that they're actually like really good and that they're doing really well and that they're banging and whatever, but the thing is that they're alone, they're insecure, they're desperate for attention, they can only thrive if others care for them, but then they know that those friendships are not legit or that they're not being honest, and then They rely on drugs, alcohol, women, partying, or whatever, because that's the only way that they can feel some sort of, I guess, happiness. But what happens is with happiness, is that whatever comes from a human source is like humans, and humans do not live forever. Humans are not eternal, and therefore everything we make is ephemeral, it has an expiration date. However, if we have a source of happiness that is not human but is eternal, like God, then our happiness no longer depends on circumstances, but because it is derived, or it comes from an eternal source, then it doesn't matter what's happening around you. You can be going through hell, but because your happiness comes from something outside of yourself that is eternal, then no matter what happens, you can, like Psalms 23, you can go through the valley of the shadow of death, but you'll fear no evil because God is with you. What happens is later on that as you live your life, you start to realize that there are things that you choose, there are things that you add to your life that either have made you happier or have taken away from the happiness that you wish you had. So basically, it all boils down to we each decide every day what ingredients we add to this dish we call life. You can add ingredients that are going to add life, or you can add ingredients that are going to poison your life and poison the lives of people around you. If you're like myself and you want to be happy, then you should ask yourself, what happens to people that decide to live lives where they add ingredients the Bible calls bad or evil? For example, do people that lie all the time, do they have good lives? Do people that commit adultery and they're just going at it all the time, do they look happy? Are they genuinely happy? Do people that let themselves go and they abuse their bodies and they don't care and they do whatever the heck they want, do they ultimately live happy and fulfilled lives, or do they take away from themselves and do they take away from other people and then they're miserable and everyone around them is miserable? Are they happy? Are they lonely? Are party animals as happy as they look like on their Instagram pictures or their Facebook posts? We have to study this because we get one shot at life, and if we only get one shot at life, then we have to make it a good one. So the question then is, what ingredients am I adding to my life? What ingredients are you adding to your life? Over time, you'll realize, if you're honest with yourself, what certain ingredients do, very much like what certain ingredients do when you put, for example, if you put some habanero or some ghost pepper in a curry or whatever it is you're cooking, you're going to feel that when you eat it and then when you go to the restaurant, but you're going to feel it. So the thing is, especially after you lived long enough, what certain things do. The question then is, will you keep adding them to your life? And if you're a bit curious and a bit clever, what happens to people that decide to follow God's recipe book? You can look them up on Google, you can look them up on, I don't know, some random website, but just consider this for a moment. What happens when someone decides not to lie, not to steal, not to cheat, not to covet, not to, sleep around or whatever? Do they live happier lives? Do they have more fulfilling lives? Do they grow more as a person? I want to end this by asking you to please consider the following. What is happening with your life, and what ingredients are you adding to your life? And that ultimately will determine the level of happiness, fulfillment, and enjoyment that you will get from this life. I hope you decide to at least consider God's recipe book. And if you decide to give God's recipe book a try, I guarantee that sooner or later you'll realize that there's no better happiness than knowing that what you do every day, even though it doesn't look like is making that big of a difference, over time it adds up to a life worth living and a life with real happiness. In the end, then we have this other question. The question then is, can God tell the future? And if that's so, then that'll be next time. But for now, remember, your life is like a dish, and the ingredients you add determine how good or how bad it's going to be like. Have a nice day. Have a nice day?